I want to welcome everybody to the 21st Virtual History of 2021 presented by the Baltimore Architecture Foundation and Baltimore Heritage. My name is Eric Lowe. I'm currently the Secretary of the Board of the Foundation and a past president of the organization. Everybody here at the Foundation would like to thank you, and everybody from Baltimore Heritage as well would like to thank you all who have donated to be with us today. Your support allows us to host virtual histories like this every week. Before we get started, there's a couple of short announcements. I hope you can join us next week for a presentation by Jan Marie Smith about the design of Camden Yards, which is, I think everyone agrees, one of the world's greatest ballparks, and one that marked a sea change in how baseball clubs think about architecture and urban design. And then on June 25th, Sandra Vicchio and Jillian Storms will join us for a presentation on the Pratt Central Library's history and its recent renovation. The building was also a finalist in our Arch Madness competition earlier in the spring. Joining us today is Paul Espinoza. Paul has been the curator of the George Peabody Library since 2016. In his role, Paul helps researchers access and utilize the Peabody's incredible collections. He conducts classes, leads tours, and organizes special exhibitions at the library. If you have any questions during the presentation, please add them to the Q&A box. And with that, I'll turn it over to Paul.
Okay, can you all hear me and see my slide there? I hope. My name is Paul Espinoza, and I just wanted to say thanks, first of all, to the Baltimore Architecture Foundation and Baltimore Heritage for this invitation to present on the George Peabody Library. You know, normally before COVID, I would do 3 or 4 tours a week, and so I'm getting back into the swing of things with these Zoom tours, which are nice because we can reach a lot more people at once. But all to say, I would encourage you, once we're back up and running, to come actually visit the space. And I'm happy to answer questions in person and for you to explore the space in person. Okay, normally we start right out in the exhibit gallery, and this is what you'll see, this rather modest original library sign from 1878. And one of these original door fixtures. And I put rather modest because they are rather modest. You would have really no idea that once we turn that door handle, you were in for this beautiful space. And one of the pleasures of my job is to walk in with people and just watch their eyes go up and their mouth gape open with you know, a surprise and enthusiasm for this space. We often make these lists of 25 most beautiful libraries in the world that you see on the internet or in magazines. And you know, one can start to take that for granted, but when one really thinks about it, they're putting us next to royal libraries built in Spain or Copenhagen in the 1600s, 1700s. And so for a building here in Baltimore in 1878, that's quite good company. I'm just going to move through some of these rather quickly in the interest of time. These are some beautiful photographs that were taken by a Hopkins undergraduate, a physics student. And what he did was take lots of different pictures and then on the computer stitch them together. This gives you a different sense of the different glows and the colors in the space at different times of the day. This is from the 3rd floor. Hopefully this gives you a little bit of perspective of the volume of the space. There's a little over 300,000 books in the collection. Most are from the late 1800s, but we have books that stretch back to the Renaissance and every century thereafter. So it's not only a historic collection in terms of the 19th century, but it's historically deep as well. And we'll talk about the books here in a bit. This is a view from the 6th floor, quite nice. You can see the railings really aren't that tall. And this is one of the reasons why we don't let visitors up into the stacks. These railings aren't up to code, as they would say. They only come up to about your knees, and we don't want people leaning over those, obviously. This is a beautiful photograph, again, taken by Matthew from the 6th floor. He did that with this camera on this little contraption here. Okay, when the library opened in 1878, the first librarian, Nathaniel Morison, sat down and wrote down his thoughts. He said, "The setting and surrounding of books are as suitable for ornamentation or as legitimate objects on which to display artistic beauty and taste as our title pages, print, paper, margins, and bindings." And the more time you spend in this space, the more you realize this is happening all around us. So for example, the ornamentation that you see in this woodcut title page by William Morris of the famous Kelmscott Press, right? When you look at, let's see if I can get this, for example, the railing there, you can see how that picks up on that same tendril pattern, or these patterns in this binding in red Morocco here. So again, the books, the paper, the architecture, the ornamentation is all informing each other. And that was all deliberate, of course. And then he goes on, "A grand hall filled with the gathered wisdom of ages, visibly set in alcoves chastely but richly ornamented, will impress the young student with a respect for books and a sense for their importance." Quite a mouthful, right? But I think it captures it well. Not only when people come in and see the space, but when they look at the books per se. And that's really what we try to do today with this collection, is use it for teaching, research, exhibitions, these sorts of things. Because a young student can go their whole career on a laptop. We want to keep that from happening. People often ask, has there been any movies filmed in the space? And the short answer is yes. There's a quick scene in Sleepless in Seattle where Meg Ryan walks through and her brother is portrayed as the Institute director. There's even a movie, Washington Square from 1997, in which the library doubled as a Parisian bookstore. I wasn't here, but it would have been neat, I think, to see these actors in costume, much how they would have looked when the library first opened in 1878, probably. I wish somebody would have taken some good still photos of the time. Okay, since this is the architectural group, I thought I'd talk a little bit about the architect, Edmund Lind, who received his training in London. He went to the London School of Design. He was British born, but immigrated to the US in 1855 and sets up shop as an architect. And he actually wins the commission to design the entire institute when the Board of Trustees puts out that call. And so we even have his original architectural drawings in our archives. And so these are the drawings for this beautiful spiral staircase that I'm sure some of you have seen. This is one of the most beautiful staircases I've certainly ever seen, and quite a picturesque spot. Scholars believe much of his design was based on this library that you see that was built in Cincinnati in 1873. This is from Harper's from 1874, and you can see many similarities. Sadly, this beautiful building was demolished in the 1950s in Cincinnati. Thankfully, that didn't happen here in Baltimore because of organizations like yours to preserve them. And you can see their railings, I think, were actually a little even more precarious in many ways. It's fun to explore the space. This is above our skylight. This is the original iron truss work and the glass ley lights, again, dating from 1878. And these did their duty and survived very well. They were starting to show fatigue and wear. And so a couple years ago, we did a major skylight renovation project. We even have some of the catalogs from the Bartlett and Robbins Ironworks company here in Baltimore. Many of you may be familiar with that company, that supplied the cast iron for the building. I should have mentioned everything is cast iron: the railings, the floors, the stairwells, the pillars, the columns, even some of the bookcases up above. I just love this cover. There's a dog there, which is kind of strange, but if you turn that, you can see it's a Chesapeake Bay Retriever. And there are actually two of these out in front of the Maryland History Center for for culture and history today that you can see. You can see written right on those beams, Bartlett and Robbins Company. This is up again in the skylight. And I mentioned the renovation. They employed the architectural engineers at 1200 AE is their moniker. And they designed these wonderful, they're called saddles, basically, that doesn't really impinge on the original ironwork. It just reinforces and strengthens it. And all this is reversible from what I understand, but it adds support and strength so that they could put new glass up in that greenhouse glass that you saw to prevent leaks and that sort of thing. When you look down at the floor, the original marble floors, you'll see these big black plates. And people often wonder, what are those? Well, if you were to lift up those black plates, you would see this original lattice gratework. And if you lift that up in turn, you'll see these original pipes that run parallel the whole length of the floor. And they used to pump steam through those pipes, and that's how they would heat this space. Now, as you can imagine, that would have been pretty detrimental to the books over time. I can't imagine the heat that would have gathered way up there on the 5th and the 6th floors. But this is how they originally heated the space. And everything that's electric lamp now, that you can see behind me lit with electricity, was originally gas lamp. So it would have been quite an interesting space to be in. I think you would have heard all the steam and the gas sort of constantly buzzing in your ear. Today you hear the air conditioning in your ear. How do we maintain this space? Well, our funding comes from Johns Hopkins University. We're part of the Sheridan Libraries. But we're also a popular wedding and events venue, which of course brings in good revenue for the library. And so maybe some of you have attended a wedding or an event here. Quite a popular destination. Sadly, COVID put much of this on hold. Okay, so that's briefly about the architecture, about the building, about Lind. If you have more specific questions, please do ask. But I want to talk about how we got here briefly. So we are the benefactors of Mr. George Peabody, who was born in South Danvers, Massachusetts. Today there's a Peabody, Massachusetts, named in his honor. As a young man, he only had about a 6th grade, 7th grade education, and he's apprenticed to an uncle who sets up shop in Georgetown in DC. So young George moves to Georgetown. He's there for the fighting of 1812 when the British are on the doorsteps of Washington. And after that, after he gets out of the militia, he goes into business with a gentleman named Elisha Riggs. And Riggs and Peabody move up here to the port of Baltimore in 1815 and get their start and do quite well. And I won't go into the financial history. There is still a Riggs National Bank today in DC, just to give you some sense of the longevity. But by 1837, George moves to London to look over that end of their business. And he's primarily there in London for the rest of his life. He dies in 1869, so from 37 to 69, he's there in London. And he makes his fortune by backing loans that are granted by English bankers to Americans as the country is growing and expanding west for the railroads and infrastructure, you name it. English bankers don't quite trust those Americans to pay them back. Peabody says, I'll stand them in good stead. So when they do pay them back, he does quite well. And just a little trivia, when he sets up shop in London, it goes under the name of George Peabody and Company, and he goes into partnership with Junius Spencer Morgan. J.P. Morgan, the son, was all of 19 when he joined the firm, and he was their New York factor while they were in London. He became world famous for not only his business acumen, but his wealth and his philanthropies. When all was said and done, he gave about $10 million in acts of philanthropy. His largest gift was actually to the housing for working poor in London. He gave about $4 million for that, and about $1.4 million to establish this institute. This is a statue by William Wetmore Story that sits in front of the Royal Exchange in London in recognition of that large gift. And there was actually a copy commissioned and given to the city of Baltimore. It sits right out front of the Institute today in 1890. So there's this nice transatlantic cultural connection. And when he gives the money for the Institute in 1857, he does it for the improvement of the moral and intellectual culture of the inhabitants of Baltimore and an enlargement and diffusion of a taste for the fine arts. This is still relevant today, right? But this is in his founding letter. This is a wonderful photograph taken at the opening of the Institute, 1866, and you can see there behind George and all the school children gathered. There's the first phase of the Institute that Lynn designed. Where I'm sitting today, where the library is that second phase, which takes up that brownstone, that brick building that you see next to the white building there. So that was the second phase. Specifies he wants 4 parts: a public art gallery, a public lecture series, a music conservatory, and a free public, though non-circulating library. Okay. We are most known today as a music conservatory, certainly. A lot of very talented students. They have around 500 students every year. Important folks. There's Marin Alsop there, the conductor of the BSO. She conducts the Peabody Orchestra here as well and does classes. There's Leon Fleischer receiving his Kennedy Award honors. Sadly, Mr. Fleischer passed away just 2 years ago now, but was a real presence here on the campus. Of course, what I'm interested in are the books. And George, in that founding letter, said, first, for an extensive library to be well furnished in every department of knowledge and of the most approved literature. And so this is a photograph of our rare book room, where we keep many of these treasures today. They drew up wish list of books that they wanted to acquire for the library. These, what we call desiderata list, things that were desired for the library. They printed these up in 1863, sent these off to book dealers in the States and in Europe, and the books started to pour in. And we can actually trace how these books came in, which is a huge project, but one we're undertaking today. And you can see they annotated their in-house list quite extensively. They wrote BOT for bot. So for example, at the bottom here, you can see C. Darwin, Charles Darwin, on the origin of the species bot. The New York edition, 1860, they eventually ended up with the first English edition as well, which is quite a rare volume. Important works of natural history. This is a work by a gentleman named Albertus Seba from 1734. What you're seeing there are all copper plate engravings. Everything is hand colored. This is a thesaurus of natural things is how the title translates. And Seba, what Seba did, he was a Dutchman. He paid the sailors, the surgeons on these ships of the Dutch East India Company to bring him back specimens from the New World and throughout the world. And he cataloged them in this wonderful 4-volume set. This is a very rare book by William Morris, I mentioned before, called the Kelmscott Chaucer. This is one of only 425 volumes ever printed. You may know the name Kelmscott from chintzes and wallpapers and furniture based in London, the father of the arts and crafts movement, but his real passion was printing. We have a wonderful H.L. Mencken collection for you Baltimore aficionados. I love this photo of Mencken celebrating the end of Prohibition. We still acquire for the collection. This is a wonderful broadside that recently came into the collection, celebrating the passage of the 15th Amendment. There was a big parade and procession held here in Baltimore on May 19th, 1870. And there you've got important figures like Frederick Douglass and Benjamin Banneker at the bottom. And on the pillars of education and science, the ballot box, right? These are issues that are still with us today in today's political climate. And so to have a broadside like this to narrate and to talk about these issues and to do research around is quite important. And again, this is quite ephemeral, and we're lucky it has survived. A lot of notable intellectuals have come through the space. Here's a picture of John Dos Passos, famous for Manhattan Transfer or the USA trilogy. He spent much of his later years here in Baltimore. Him and his wife. He was in the library so often that people thought he was a librarian and would ask him for help. That's what I tell the students. That's a good mistake to be made. Again, we primarily use the collection for teaching. We average about 80 classes a semester, either here or up at the main campus. And that's quite a lot if you think about it. We're reaching a lot of students. These are MICA students, a group of MICA students here with me, and then the other student with the glasses is from Hopkins. And how do we use this material? Well, again, we try to put it in context and make it relatable to the students. So these are some of my favorite books in the collection. This is a set of what we call album amicorum, friendship albums, and these date from the 1630s and 40s. And in those friendship albums are autographs from one German student to another. You know, as you traveled around and studied, you'd have your friends sign these. And I love this one by Seneca. They're quoting Seneca there at the top. Remedium omnium malorum patientiae. Right? Good lesson for us today in this COVID environment. The remedy of all evils is patience. And then the other one on the right here is by a music student who was studying at the Music Academy of Leipzig in 1638. And it's a little acrostic that reads musica going down and then across mea unica spes, my only hope, Jesus Christus, amen. So he's showing off his Latin, his music, his Christian credentials, if you will. And again, to put this in front of a music student today and tell them this is one of your peers who was maybe all of 15 or 16 years old in 1638 makes quite an impression. We use the collection for teaching the arts of printing. Here's a scene of compositors and an encyclopedia showing the different implements of printing. Again, a printer's case there, and then a gentleman dressed in a costume of a printer's art. We even have an original wood block that was used to print the book I'm holding there from 1563. And again, it makes quite an impression to realize that this block was inked and then touched that page for all of 20 seconds, say in 1563, and now they're reunited right there in front of the student. We have a wonderful Don Quixote collection. Our earliest is 1617. We have around 200 or so different editions of Don Quixote, not only in Spanish, but other translations as well. We have the earliest illustrated edition from 1673, and there you can see Don Quixote and Sancho Panza and the rest of the gang. Of course, American literature. This is a second edition of Whitman's Leaves of Grass with the famous endorsement by Ralph Waldo Emerson on the spine, in which he wrote, "I greet you at the beginning of a great career." Emerson wrote this to Whitman privately, and on the release of the first edition, Whitman, a great self-promoter, put it on the spine, kind of peeved Emerson off when he did that for the second edition. Again, one of my favorite little books in the collection. This is a brief description of the American mammoth, and this was held at the Peel Museum, just down the street from us. And this was printed in 1836. And this is the result of this excavation that you see, this wonderful painting by Charles Wilson Peel, which is at the Maryland Center of History and Culture. Those mastodon bones actually made their way to Baltimore. And if you open up that little pamphlet, there's this wonderful fold out that gives you the sense of the size and the scale. So this was wonderful to have, but we increased that collection, if you will, by buying this wonderful broadside, the Great American Mastodon, 20,000 pounds. This again is a quite ephemeral item. And I love the exclamation points after Mastodon there, the 2 exclamation points. And I love to show this to MICA students or graphic design students. I ask them why those 2 exclamation points, and we always come to the conclusion because the Mastodon has those 2 big tusks, right? I think that's on purpose. We have wonderful books of technology, if you will. Edward Muybridge, Animal Locomotion. This was published in Philadelphia, 1887. This is a 9-volume set. This would be cost prohibitive for us to buy today, and there's really not any of these on the market. This is the famous work in which Muybridge lined up cameras and then passed animals, horses, carriages, people, kids playing leapfrog, you name it, in front of the camera to capture each moment. And when they did this, they realized that a horse actually floats when he's in full gallop there. And then again, if you were to cut these into strips and put them into what's called a zoetrope and spin that zoetrope, you'll see this turn into a motion picture. So again, a wonderful book. Sometimes we make discoveries in the collection. We call these eureka moments. This is a wonderful artwork of Louis Comfort Timpany. I knew we had this in the collection, but it wasn't until I opened up that title page and realized that it was actually given to the Institute and signed by Mr. Louis Comfort Timpany himself in 1916. So again, quite impressive provenance there. We have a wonderful 4-edge collection of books. They're called 4-edge because this is the forward edge of the book. And if you, when you're normally looking at the book, you'll see just a gilded edge, but when you bend that edge, you'll see these wonderful paintings. So here you have an edition of Shakespeare showing Queen Elizabeth. Here's an edition of Byron, even Winnie the Pooh. There's the whole gang there. We have over 200 editions of these 4-edge painted books. Okay, and just to wrap it up, we do a lot in the library, not just teaching, but we do programming and events. This is a wonderful series called In the Stacks, led by a colleague named Sam Besson, who's the Levy curator. These are wonderful programs, again, before COVID, but he'll start it up again after, in which they play music. It's not just a recital, but they give historic context and explanation for the music that they're playing. We get big crowds come out for these. We did a wonderful Baltimore ballroom event, co-sponsored by the libraries and the Morgan Foundation. This is part of the Baltimore's LGBTQ community of color, in which it's part fashion show, part dance, and a wonderful, wonderful experience here in the collection. They built these props, as you can see the books on the head of this performer here, based on books in the collection. There was dance, you name it. We do yearly exhibitions in the space. This is some recent scholarship that came out of the collection. Mary Ryan's Taking the Land to Make a City, in which she compares the growth of Baltimore with the growth of San Francisco. Quite an interesting book. This is a book by a Hopkins professor named Bill Eggington on the history of Don Quixote. And so with that, I think I'll stop there and turn it back over to you all. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. That was a great presentation, and we're getting some questions. And I think maybe what we can start with is, so obviously the library is closed right now due to the pandemic. But when you do open back up, how can someone from the public gain access to the library?
So that's a good question. I think a lot of people tend to think that we're only open to scholars or that sort of thing. Some people that live their whole lives in Baltimore don't realize we're here. Of course, we don't want that impression. Anybody can come in and use the collection. You don't have to be a scholar per se. It's always helpful if I kind of know what you're looking for ahead of time. I can help you ferret some of that out. But if not, you can come in and I can help you. We have computers which tell us, you know, where everything is, and you can search by topic, keyword, author, title, you name it. And then I go up and pull the book for you and bring it down for you. Look at it here. Nothing gets checked out, but you can do the research here, and we can provide digital copies of things if needed. So yeah.
And is there an email list that people can sign up for to hear about upcoming exhibitions or programs happening at the library?
What you can do is check the Hopkins Sheridan Libraries. If you just Google Hopkins Sheridan Libraries, or even George Peabody Library, Baltimore, you'll be taken to a page that tells about upcoming exhibits and these sorts of things. Yeah.
Yeah, and if someone isn't interested in looking at a book but just wants to see the beautiful space, can they also gain access?
Yeah, you can just come in. Again, you know, we're trying to figure out how things are going to look after the pandemic, but we'll be open and it will be accessible. So you'll be able to come in and just see the space or take a picture.
Great. Yeah, I'm looking forward to being able to visit again. It's such a beautiful space. We have a bunch of questions coming in about the collections here. I don't know if you addressed this in the presentation, but one question is, what is the oldest book in the library? And also, is there a subject concentration of the library's books?
Is there a subject what?
Concentration. Is there like a focus?
You know, it was meant to be a universal library, so a little bit of everything: art, history, literature, science, mechanical arts, farming, you name it. So there's a lot here. Over the years, some concentrations have built up. I mentioned Mencken, Don Quixote, natural history, lots of bird books, butterfly books, botany books, that sort of thing. You know, and it's of its time, right? So we don't have books published in 2019 in here, for example. There isn't too much in here past 1930. And so it's people that are looking at the history of thought, you know, what people thought of evolution in the late 1800s, or how Shakespeare was illustrated in the late 1800s, early 1900s. It's that sort of research that's kind of going on. And then of course, you know, there's books again of its time. So there's books on phrenology, you know, sort of these pseudosciences today, but that were current of the time period. So, and what was the first part of the question? Sorry.
Yeah, the first part was, do you know what the oldest book is in the library?
Oh, the oldest. So we have some manuscripts, a book of hours from the 1430s, some music manuscripts from the 1480s. You know, printing, most of our books, of course, are printed, 1450 or so for Gutenberg. So we have quite a few books that were printed within that first 50 years of the printing press. And of course, a lot of those are Greek and Latin classics that the Renaissance was rediscovering in manuscript and then printing up in deluxe editions for scholars.
Great. And Paul, can you stop sharing your screen? I don't think everyone realizes that you're actually in the library right now. That's not just a, that's not just a photo of the library. You're actually in the space.
Yeah, I don't know if you can see that. Yeah, the library is right behind me. There's actually, you can go online and actually pull this backdrop for your own Zoom meetings. But yeah, this is the library behind me.
Yeah, and someone had just wrote in the comment, you have one of the best jobs ever. So tell us a little bit about what it's like working in what's considered one of the most beautiful libraries in the world.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I certainly felt that with the beginning of the pandemic, right? I wasn't able to get in the space, and I used to spend countless hours here. And I finally came to realize, well, it was just the environment of the space that I missed so much. Just being able to walk around, be in contact with these books, smell the books, this sort of thing. So yeah, I feel quite lucky to be here. You know, there are some days where I'm just stuck at email. But the best days, I think, are when I'm sharing the collection with people, sharing with students, that sort of thing. And, sometimes one visit can turn into many visits, and then help with more research. And I always tell students, whether they're from Hopkins or Micah or Goucher, if you come in and do some original research with what we call a primary source, right? So you look at that first edition of Darwin, or you look at a first edition of Melville or Poe, and to see how the type was laid out on the page, right? And then you incorporate that into your paper, and 90% of your references are articles that you've gathered online and this sort of thing, right? Which is an amazing tool. You're always sure to get a better paper when you come, and a better grade even, when you come and look at these primary objects and incorporate them into your research. So that's one way I try to encourage students. And there's lots to be done here, right? There is so much in the collection that's never been translated, right? Latin, Spanish, French, German. We read the greats, Goethe and Rousseau, Cervantes, right? But there are so many what they call toilers in the vineyard, right, that have never been translated. So there's a lot of original research that students and lay people and scholars can do with this collection.
And I have an interesting question here about maintaining the books. Is there a book bindery in-house, or is there one shared with the university?
Good question. So up at the main campus, again, we're part of Johns Hopkins. So up at the Homewood campus, there is a conservation lab in what's called the Brody Learning Commons there. And every year they're picking books from our collection to preserve and restore and conserve. And they can do miracles on the book, right? They can, a book that's missing both binding, both boards of the binding or what have you, or has old water damage, they can really bring back to life. So there is a conservation lab. We'll never get to everything, but we do every year. We're dusting and vacuuming the books and that sort of thing.
Okay, we have time for one more question here. Someone is wondering if the catalog of the collection is available online to look at.
It is. And by the way, if any of you have follow-up questions, please email Nathan, and I'm sure he'd be happy to forward it to me, and I can give you more specifics and links and these sorts of things. But again, if you go onto the Johns Hopkins Sheridan Library's website, there's a catalog there that's universal for all of the Hopkins libraries. And when you go there, you can set parameters. So you can see you can set the parameter for just the George Peabody Library, and then you can search by author, keyword, title, and see what we have just here in this library. And again, I'll make my email available. I'm happy to help with personal email.
Great. Well, thank you, Paul. And I will look forward to being able to visit the library again, hopefully sometime soon. Thank you again for joining us, and thank you everybody for tuning in. I hope you can join us next week for a presentation on Camden Yards. Thanks.
Thank you.